So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Facilitating the panel this morning is Dr. Julie Temple. She's an educator developer with the Center for Innovation, Teaching and Learning, or CITL, as most of us know it. We have a group of panel presenters with us here today as well. So we have Antonia Francis with the MUN Disability Information Support Center, Jannatul Shifa with the Internalization Office, Jen Dion, former Assistive Technology Advisor with the Blundon Center, Logan St. Croix with Trans Support, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Tama Fost with the Indigenous Student Support Center. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Julie.
So as Dana said, my name is Julie Temple. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm an educational developer with CITL, as well as an adjunct professor in gender studies. So I do teach myself. I've been teaching at Memorial for a number of years. So thank you so much for all of you for attending today. Really glad to see such a wonderful turnout. The title of our panel is Teaching All Students, What Do Diverse Students Want You to Know? And I want to begin by acknowledging the territory on which we gather as located on the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk. I also acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of the Mi'kmaq of Daunguk, the Innu of Nitassinan, the Inuit of Nunatsiavut, and the Inuit of Nunatuavut. Further, I acknowledge that recognition is not enough. Universities are colonial institutions that have done and continue to do harm to Indigenous peoples. We all have a great deal of work ahead of us in order to build respectful relationships with Indigenous communities and truly decolonize and indigenize our universities. I commit to learning, listening, and working towards true reconciliation within the university community and beyond. So as instructors, we know that MUN students come from diverse backgrounds and experiences. However, we may not be aware of all of the intersecting systemic and institutional barriers that our students may face. When we are designing our curriculum, planning assessments, and engaging with students in the classroom, whether that's virtual or in person, how do we ensure that we're teaching for all students? How can we try to make sure that our courses are more equitable, more accessible, and more welcoming for all of our students? This panel today is a collaboration between the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning and Student Life. So in this session, students are the experts and we, the instructors, are the learners. Today, I'm delighted to welcome 5 representatives from diverse student organizations to share their expertise, experiences, and recommendations for how to create an equitable, accessible course and a welcoming, inclusive classroom that celebrates students in all their diversity. So I'm going to go through the 5 panelists in alphabetical order and ask if they can just introduce themselves to start off and let us know the organization that they're representing. So Antonia, are you okay to start?
Hi everyone, my name is Antonia Francis. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm here representing MUNDISC today. We are the Munsu Resource Center, or the Disability Resource Center for students on campus.
Thanks so much. And Jannatul, can you go next?
So as Julie mentioned, I am Jannatul Shifa, and I'm representing the international students on behalf of the Internationalization Office of Memorial University, which is responsible for providing support towards the international students in terms of academic, immigration, and financial support, whatever they face during their academic journey at Memorial University. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Jen?
Hey folks, my name is Jen Dion. I use primarily she, her, or they, them pronouns. I'm speaking both as an employee who recently was an assistive technology advisor at the Blundon Center who has transitioned to client support over at CITL, and a recent graduate student of the Masters of Gender Studies program. So I have an interesting background in that way.
Thanks so much. Logan?
My name is Logan St. Croix. My pronouns are he or they. I'm speaking, I guess, on behalf of gender diverse students. I'm a recent graduate from MUN and was a transgender student at MUN. I currently work and serve on the board with Trans Support NL, providing gender diversity training to service providers, as well as peer support and resources for the trans and gender diverse community here in Newfoundland.
Thanks, Logan. And for full disclosure, Logan and I are both directors of the board of TSNL. And Tama, I don't see Tama in my list. I wonder if she's here. Oh, hi, Tama.
Hello. My name's Tama Fost. I'm first generation urban Inuk. I work with the Indigenous Student Resource Center here at Memorial, which is a huge honor. I honestly don't think I would have been able to complete my studies had it not been for the then Native Liaison Office, which has now gone over a few changes. So I'm incredibly honored to work with this unit at Memorial and also to be here this afternoon. And I wanted to thank the attendees and also the organizers, Julie, and the other panelists. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks, Tama. And I'm absolutely delighted to have all 5 of you here today. I think you're a huge resource for the whole university community. So let's get started. As I said, I'm moving through in alphabetical order. I gave each of the panelists 2 questions to consider. One was about what the students that they represent would most want their instructors to know about their experiences at Memorial. And the second question was, what would these students most like their instructors to do differently? So I'll start with Antonia. What in your experience, do students with disabilities most want their instructors to know about their experiences at MUN?
Yeah, so to start off with, the Disability Resource Center actually put out 2 surveys this year, one in the fall and one a couple weeks ago. The one in the fall, we focused on accessibility on remote learning. And the survey we put out a couple weeks ago is focused on the return to campus post-pandemic. So we actually had over 100 responses. So when you asked this question, I started to read down through and try and find kind of what stood out or what was most common. And it's hard to narrow it down to 2 or 3 things. But I think when it comes down to what we want them to know, accommodation when you're looking at in class, in person, looks very different sometimes to accommodation remote. And accommodation for one student who has a disability isn't the same as accommodation for another student with disability. Accommodation is also not a pathway for greater accessibility. It's a tool from a toolbox. So it's hard to generalize accommodations and students with disabilities because each of us are different. We're not lazy. We're not trying to get out of things. It's that we need extra support. And some instructors are more than giving in support, and others almost don't understand. And I think for us, sometimes that comes from a background of not being educated towards disabilities in post-secondary, and universal design and accommodations. So I think one thing that stood out is that there isn't equal opportunity. There isn't equal opportunity in learning. There isn't equal opportunity even in student employment. I've heard a lot of students who wanted student employment or MUSEPs, but they don't either have the skills or there are barriers put in place. Also, there's not the same opportunities for funding and scholarships. Students who take reduced course loads or don't complete certain parameters aren't always, what's the word I'm looking for? Given the opportunity for, say, the Dean's List, certain scholarship standing. And it's not because they may have remarkable marks, they may have remarkable volunteer experience, but sometimes they just get screened out because of an algorithm. And that's that is a barrier. So that's a huge one that we just don't get the same opportunities as some other students get. Another one that I hear a lot is accessibility within the campus. Our campus is old, um, and it's accessible to an extent, but some things that aren't thought of is, say, there's 10 minutes when we're on class, and not everyone can make it from building to building in 10 minutes. So you're creating a barrier of the courses that could be taken. And that's a really hard one to fix. It costs a lot of money. And I know it's not something you can fix overnight, but it's something to keep in mind, that you may have so many required courses for your degree, and it could simply come down to where the elevators are, where the accessibility entrances are. You can't make it from class to class. That's how big was reading through. But yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Antonia. And they're, like, as you said, some of them are large issues that take larger infrastructure change. But they're also things that, as instructors, we can keep in mind if a student is continuously 5 or 10 minutes late for class, to find out why that might be. It might be because they simply can't get across campus in that length of time. So in terms of thinking about what students with disabilities would most like instructors to do differently, what suggestions did you come up with?
So one of them is not being afraid to chat with the student and ask questions. They are living their experience. For the most part, they know what they need. And if not, they're open to finding out what's going to work best. Don't be afraid to admit that you don't know how to help them, or you're not sure. Ask for help. I'm sure there are people who can also additionally help. And instead of simply saying, this is what I'm going to offer you, or I don't know, so no, just take the time to learn about what maybe the disability that you're being asked to accommodate is, and reaching out to colleagues and finding out what you can do. It comes down to education around accommodations and disabilities. I've had professors who will be willing to add a ramp to their classroom for those 3 steps, but are they willing to do a very similar thing for an invisible disability or mental health? So they're willing to put the ramp in there. That's great. But in comparison, are you willing to alternate your tests? Or are you willing to add closed captioning for your classes? When returning to campus, it would be great to see not only the instructors, but the university think about a hybrid method. Not everybody's going to feel comfortable going back to campus right away. By going remote and going online, in some ways it actually became more accessible for certain students who may not have been able to go onto campus, or if you have a critical health condition and sometimes you just can't leave your house, that eliminated that barrier because they could attend class. They weren't missing out because they couldn't leave their house or they couldn't stand up that day. So by removing that barrier, you actually created something. So if that could stay, you're not taking it back away from them. That's a huge one. And not only for students with disabilities, think about student parents. If you didn't have childcare, now you're not missing class because you can do it from your home. It's not just about accessibility for students with disabilities, it's about accessibility for all. So the biggest one I think that to do differently is talk to the student, learn about it. It's a huge thing about education. We all do the academic integrity course. We would love to see something similar for instructors and professors on accommodations. So yeah, that's kind of about it. I mean, there are a million ideas and a million things, and each student you speak to might say something different. And there's something they want their professor to know, but you just have to ask them. And yeah, that's about it.
I so appreciate those 2 points, and I think they're very complimentary. Number one, that every student is individual, and so you need to actually talk to them and ask questions and get to know what they need personally. But then also that universal accessibility is part of what we're talking about, that by making our courses more accessible for students with disabilities, we're actually making our courses more accessible for everyone.
Yeah.
And as a single parent, I appreciate that example as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sure there's going to be questions for you as well when we get to the end.
Thank you.
Jannatul, I'll call on you next to tell us about what do international students most want their instructors to know about their experiences.
Thank you so much, Julie. So the international students mostly, at least especially during this COVID-19 pandemic, for taking the courses, the biggest challenge that like the international students are facing is regarding taking the courses in different time zones. As we know, since last summer, international students are taking courses from their own countries. However, it's although the learning and everything is the same, the problem in here that arises is that the students in different time zone, if the lectures are live, that happens on a specific time, according to the annual time zone, it might be like someone living in Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, or China in a different time zone. The time could be, let's say, 2 p.m. in here in the afternoon, but the class time according to their time zone is 2 a.m. at night, midnight. And this is not only in the live lecture that the students are facing this problem. The problem is also very acute when it comes about exams. If the exams are timed, that is according to the Newfoundland time, that everybody has to take the exam at the same time, let's say 12 p.m. in the afternoon. It could be 1 a.m. at night for someone else living in a different time zone. So this is the biggest issue that the international students are facing over the past year because of this online learning. And because although some instructors are providing flexibilities in this regard by uploading pre-recorded lectures or making exams available for 24 hours so that everyone living in different time zones can take the exam according to their own time. Not all instructors are opting for this option. This is creating a huge barrier in terms of communication and learning for the international students. The other thing that I also would like to mention is that having the need to buy the different tools for courses, as from the international students' perspective. What happens is that I think everyone knows in here that the international students at the Canadian universities, not only at MUN, everywhere, in any post-secondary institutions, they have to pay at least 3-4 times more tuition comparing to a national student, which is pretty normal, and we're okay with that because we knew it. However, it becomes a little bit more like burdensome when for some certain courses, you have to buy access tools to meet the requirement of those courses. For example, buying top hats for a semester or buying different codes from different publications because of the requirement of the course. Like if I have to talk about myself, I paid over $200 last semester for 2 of my courses where I had to buy the access code because it was a requirement. And it's not only me. I reached out to some like potential international students as well to know their opinion so that I can present it accurately. More or less, whatever their opinion came, it was these 2 things: the time issue, living in different time zones, as well as having the requirement to buy access codes, which puts financial pressure on the top of the huge tuition fee that we pay. So these are the things that we are mainly concerned about, and we're looking to be accommodated by our instructor if possible, which it is, we believe.
And Jannatul, I'm actually not as familiar with the access codes. Are they codes to access like digital textbooks or other types of online resources?
Yeah, so technically it depends on the instructor and the kind of code they want their students to buy. For example, if I talk about the top hat, I took it for one of my courses. It's only for assignments, not for anything else, where you have to submit the weekly assignments assigned by the instructor. As for the other course code, access code, for example, I bought course codes from Willy Plus or Pearson and all that. They came both with e-textbook as well as with assignments. So it depends on the way your instructor designs the course for you.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for clarifying that.
No problem.
And so, thinking about those concerns and about the second question, what would be your recommendations? What do you see as the things that international students would most want their instructors to do differently?
Yeah, so as I have just mentioned, if you can recall, in the while addressing the first issue, some instructors have decided to keep their exams open for 24 hours, be it midterms or finals, so that students can have the flexibility to take the exam according to their time zone. This is really helpful, and we definitely wish all instructors adopt this facility, because that way a student will not have to wait until 2 a.m. at night to take their exam, which is maybe like the 12 p.m. in Newfoundland time. This definitely hampers but not only the exam, the course itself overall. Because it is one kind of pressure, right? You have to stay up until midnight, study, and then take the exam. Definitely, it's a huge pressure, I think. And also, as for the lectures, international students are hoping if all the instructors can adopt this method, either uploading pre-recorded lectures for the students that they can view and watch according to their own time zone, or even if they are taking live lectures through WebEx, Zoom, whatever tool, or D2L, if they can record it so that students can view it later at their own time. This is the solution to the first issue that I mentioned. And as for the solution for the second issue, it would be appreciated if the instructors can make their courses in such a way that wouldn't require the students to use the tools. Because especially for international students, it does put huge financial burden because of the fact that we're already paying a lot, 3-4 times more tuition compared to the local student. And I know many of the international students are also working both on and off campus to make sure that they're paying their tuition as well as making earning their living expenses. So for everyone, more or less, it does put pressure. So it on average. So it would be appreciated if the instructors can do this accommodation. And there's one more thing I'd also like to mention, if that's okay, regarding suggestion for instructors, how they can improve their teaching method, if that's okay.
Yes,
So,
please go ahead.
Yeah. So what happens is that, especially when it was in person, when we were learning through in-person classes, we had the one-to-one conversation. We had the opportunity to have the conversation with our instructors in classes, ask them anything, whatever we have questions about. However, definitely this is not possible when you are teaching students online, which is definitely understandable. However, what could be done in order to make sure that the instructors are checking in with their students to ask how they're doing, how their coursework is going on, if they need any kind of support, if the students need any kind of support from their instructors that could help them to go do a little bit better in the courses, would be if instructors adopt the policy, this step of creating weekly check-ins with their students. For example, like every week, at the beginning of every week, every Monday, the instructors can provide an email through D2L, through our Brightspace D2L, or through Gmail, whichever they prefer, according to their preferences, to their students to check how they're doing, to all students, how they're doing, if they're doing well, if there's something that they're feeling like they need help with, then so that the students will know that they have their instructors as their support, who's checking in with them and asking them their welfare. So they're not lagging behind. They're not afraid to reach out to them or ask any questions, not only about coursework or about anything that they want. And also, with this weekly email check-in, instructors can also set up a weekly time, a specific time, for a check-in with students, where the instructor will be checking in with the students on a weekly basis on any day, let's say for half an hour. They will be available at the time, and students will know this, so that and they will approach the instructor not only about coursework, like I said, about anything that they're having problems with regarding courses and anything else. This type of support is being provided by the instructor. It will definitely help. It definitely does help. As a student myself, I can say, to provide some mental support, as to we would know that our instructor is there, even at this difficult time, trying as much as possible from his end to support us. So for both national and international students, this support is really, really important, I'd say. This weekly check-in through regular and through this setting up a time for a weekly meeting. So yeah, this is my suggestion.
Thanks so much, Jannatul. I really appreciate those are fantastic suggestions.
No problem. Thank you so much as well for providing me the opportunity to present this. It's
Glad to have you.
No
Jen, I'll
problem.
call on you next. From your perspective, what do neurodiverse students at MUN most want their instructors to know?
Sure. I do want to acknowledge that Antonia touched on some really great institutional stuff, and I had a feeling that that's the approach that we're going to go. So I went with some very specific classroom level things that have some examples of I guess things that can be done in your classroom and interpersonally between you and your students. So I think a great starting point would be creating a roadmap that shows the destination of where this class is going to go. If I know how to get there, if I know what the destination is, I can choose a way to get there that works for me. And that can be different for everyone, and I think can benefit all students in the class, but especially folks who are neurodiverse and creative in their own senses. And if we know where we need to get to, we'll get there by the end of the course. And that's just a fancy way of saying flexibility is great, but it doesn't have to be flexibility in the sense that you're necessarily used to hearing. So flexible deadlines that we get to hold ourselves accountable for. So making a contract of flexibility so that we can work around our other courses and we can plan out our semesters more effectively for our own learning. I also think that explaining things that you wouldn't expect to need to be explained, for example. Some of the most beneficial courses I've had actually gave me a template on how to write my emails. I didn't realize I didn't know how to write an email, and that was a barrier for how I was reaching other students in the class and my professor. I didn't have that structure, so I was worried I was being judged or not being paid attention to because I didn't know how to reach out. As well as what the meaning of a office hour is. We know that you have office hours, but what does that mean? What kind of questions can we come and ask? And are we allowed to visit you? It's not always super apparent that that's what that means. And having a list of competencies that you want your students to meet so that we have that language to have that conversation with you about what we need to meet in the course. That can look like rubrics, just a list of competencies or goals or ideas of what that course is going to be about. And that can be given within the course syllabus or even a booklet that comes with it. It might seem really obvious, but some folks just really don't know, and it can help everyone in first year to third year to fourth year to grad student. Like sometimes you just don't know what you don't know until someone teaches it to you. And on that note, I think that for the world of grad students, we don't want to forget them either, is that a good way to meet with a grad student and have a conversation is through note sharing. So have your student and have yourself take independent notes from one each other, and then email them to each other, to one another, so that we can see what takeaways we had. And then we can find those common grounds and those takeaways and what is important. And if there's something missing, you as a supervisor can come in and say, here, this is what's missing. Or the person as a student can look at that and be like, oh, I totally didn't think that was an important part of this meeting, and I need to take this and use that for myself. So I think those are some good like things that you should know. Yeah, that's where I'll leave that one.
That's fantastic, Jen. I wrote down all those suggestions too. They'll be helpful to me.
Perfect.
Is there anything else you want to add around what neurodiverse students would most like their instructors to do differently?
Sure. Yeah. I think something that's very beneficial, especially in the time of COVID and working online, is building breaks into your courses, like planned silences. It's sometimes just a little bit meditative to have a break or a silence that isn't awkward. It's only really awkward when you point it out. Um, so a good way to do this is to pose a question at the front end of the class. So frame the whole class with the question and then ask for the answer at the end of the class, so that we have a full class to think of the answer to your question, so that you don't have that awkward pause after posing a question, waiting for about 30 seconds and then no one answers. And you're like, well, I guess I have to answer that question now. It's just a good way so that we can start thinking in ahead, prepare and rehearse our answers, write that down almost as our own personal script, so that we're not forgetting what we need to say. So it's almost giving us a chance to build those ideas throughout the class. I think also for in-person, we have to remember that technology is okay, especially in the year that we exist in. Our computers, our phones, our smart pens, our tablets, I understand seeing those things makes us feel like, you know, especially in Western culture, that the presenter isn't being heard or ignored by the person using these technologies, because it looks like texting. It might seem like a distraction, but to us, it might be a way of looking up how to pronounce a word, looking up the spelling of a word so we can take more accurate notes, how to make connections, even note-taking or even fidgeting and stimming ourselves as a way to hear what's going on around us, but also as a way to divert our energies, and so that we can actually focus fully on the course lectures. And I think in that as well with the technologies is captioning is important, as Antonia said. It isn't an end-all be-all for everything, but it's a good way to hear what is being said, but also see what is being said. It's very helpful for note-taking because it gives me a chance to write down what is being said as it's happening.
Thanks so much, Jen, and I'll put in a thank you to the university for agreeing to do live captioning for the conference as per our request.
It's lovely. This is great.
Moving on to Logan. What do trans students most want their instructors to know about their experiences at MUN?
Yeah, so I guess I can more specifically talk, I guess, about my experience, as well as kind of what I've heard, as opposed to speaking on behalf of an organization with the university. I guess one big thing that comes up all the time is kind of how difficult it is to change documentation. So not only within the university, but, like in terms of just outside, getting that first legal change as well. And that's not just procedurally. So I know that MUN was working on kind of like a one-stop shop for students to come and change their name and their gender as opposed to having to go to all the different departments, between like the housing, if you were, had a MUSEP and like all these different places, it can be done in one and carried over. I'm not exactly sure where that's at now. I know that was a work in progress. I don't know where it has been since I left. But even past the procedural, there's a lot of personal factors as well that sometimes don't really get a lot of attention, in that there may be safety factors as to why people haven't changed documentation, say legally, or maybe even within the school system, but are still, maybe with friends and family, people who are close to them. Maybe they're feeling comfortable to have it done within this classroom. And it can be a big barrier if if a professor or instructor is unwilling to have that conversation about maintaining that correct name for this person without the the validation of the paperwork being done already. Fees in terms of getting a legal name change are a big thing. That's of course not with the university, but some people, if they're going to be changing things on terms of their university documents, are going to get that legal name change first. And then some people are also undecided. It can take a long time to figure out what name or what pronoun or what gender marker, sorry, I should say, really represents you and is going to fit, especially when you're talking about, again, making a permanent change, something that's going to be changed within systems. So all of these things are factors to consider when people don't have the documentation, that might match, the name that they're asking you to use at that time. And kind of onto that, trans people don't owe you or anyone any sort of presentation or expression in their identity to respect their name or pronoun. So, we've heard from students who, because they are trans feminine, they have a feminine name, but because of maybe how they dress, or because how far along they are in transition, or the steps they've chosen around transition, professors or again instructors are not respecting that that name, that pronoun. They it's kind of that old, well, you don't look like what I expect a woman to look like, so I'm not going to be able to do that until you make those steps to fit my image. And of course that's wrong on 1,000 different levels, but we've heard it from people in Memorial, so we know it happens. And I think a big part, in terms of what instructors should know, I think a big foundation is the acknowledgement of the difference between sex and gender, and that neither of those things are binary. And people fit within many people fit within a spectrum, and to reinforce binary things, either within your personal narratives or the way you instruct, the content you choose to include, it has real impacts on trans and gender diverse people. Pathologizing transness as opposed to accepting that this is just a normal part of human diversity, and has been around for like a long time in many different cultures. And without that foundational acknowledgement, bias is going to be really hard to challenge, and meaning mistakes or worse are likely to happen, and those are going, and trans people, gender diverse people are going to feel those impacts if you haven't done the work to get that foundational kind of separation, that acknowledgement. And we recognize a lot of times it's something that takes time. We say it's unlearning. It's we're told so often that there's men and women and that's it. This is what men do. This is what women do. And so it takes time to kind of undo that and build up this, an understanding again of just human diversity, that we are all diverse people. We don't all fit neatly into tiny little boxes. Yeah, I think that's a big thing. Antonia touched a little bit in terms of accessibility. So just even around the classroom, even for instructors to know that there are not a whole lot of gender neutral bathrooms on campus, meaning that depending on where you are, where your next class is, and if you have to use the bathroom, you may have to like run across campus and run back. Or I know the gender diverse bathroom that I used to walk past all the time on my rooted courses was always occupied because it's one single stall thing, and if there's only like one among the 3 buildings that are around, it's probably going to be occupied. So, I've heard of so many people who have had to run back to the UC and up to the 6th floor, where all the society rooms are, to use the bathroom, and people are late, they miss class, and those things are a big barrier. I know that's and not really instructors that change the bathrooms, but being aware of that, again, kind of doing that check-in. Why, if someone's late all the time or something like that, why is that? Is it because you don't have a bathroom that you can use in between classes? Because that's something that, should be addressed and should be taken into account when, when you're looking at the needs of the student.
Thanks so
Yeah.
much, Logan. I'm just conscious of the
Yep.
time, but did you want to add anything around what you'd say that trans students would most like their instructors to do differently?
Yeah, I think the main thing, kind of like I say, is to first educate yourself. Educate yourself on the differences of sex and gender. Educate yourself on how that impacts all of our thinking, how colonialism has, shaped our understanding of sex and gender, completely erasing, well, not completely erasing, thankfully, but like, in terms of our Western societal knowledge, erasing Indigenous knowledge and cultures, their understandings of sex and gender, and kind of replacing it with this very binary thing that impacts, all of us who are living here in Canada, in very real ways. And yeah, and things to do different. Include trans voices in your curriculum. Humanities, it's very easy. There's lots of stuff out there within the humanities written by trans folks, center two-spirit voices within those stories. Also in the business sciences, all that, highlight people in your industry who have made gains. There are plenty. Leave that room for instruction. When you open up your introductions on the first day of class, suggest that people offer their pronouns. If you have to have a conversation about why you're doing that and why that is, have that conversation. Educate yourself, educate your students past the strict curriculum. You're putting these people out into the world in a very broad sense. So you have a big platform, and a lot of space to have these conversations. So I think that's a big part.
Thanks so much, Logan. And Tama, I'll head over to you. What do Indigenous students most want their instructors to know?
So to kind of echo what Logan had mentioned early on, is that I'm speaking to my own experience both as a former student and alumnus of Memorial, as well as a little bit, I'm going to scale it back from the student perspective current, just because I don't want to speak on behalf of current Memorial students who are Indigenous, because a lot has changed since and I've recognized a huge, substantial steps forward that Memorial is taking in respect to indigenization. So I guess that would tie into my first idea, is that there's no singular Indigenous student experience. There's no singular Indigenous culture, so to speak. I see that floating around sometimes in discussion. Oh, well, how can we integrate Indigenous history or Indigenous culture? Well, there are First Nations, Inuit, and Métis in Canada. In Canada alone, there are 634 distinct First Nations bands. So we are very diverse peoples. We have diverse histories, diverse cultures, diverse languages, diverse perspectives. And so I guess that with that said, sometimes I felt as though I was targeted, not in, I don't want to say targeted, but picked out as, okay, well, Tama, what do Indigenous peoples think about topic XYZ? I can't tell you what Indigenous peoples think about XYZ. I can tell you what I think about XYZ. And I can give a little bit of context within the Indigenous group that I belong to, which is Inuit. But even that I'm a little bit wary of, because I can only speak for myself. And I guess so, recognizing that there's no one cohesive voice, especially on political issues. I'm not sure if folks have read in the news about the renaming of Red Indian Lake, but there is a whole spectrum of perspectives of Indigenous peoples versus non-Indigenous peoples, and there's no one answer. You could ask me what I think about that, and as a friend, I can tell you what I think about that, but that doesn't mean that's what all Inuit think. That doesn't mean that's what all Indigenous peoples think. And so it's important, I think, to recognize that there's no singular experience, there's no singular Indigenous culture, and there's no singular Indigenous history. Another thing I would like instructors to know is that whether you're status or non-status, or whether you're a member of a land claims agreement or not, whether you self-identify or have like official recognition by the government of Canada, which that in and of itself is incredibly problematic and a whole other topic I think we could get into, but recognizing that education, post-secondary education, is not just a given and a free. I know a friend of mine, when I was in my studies, was wanting to do their practicum or their internship for their BED, Bachelor Education. And their instructor, and now this was years ago, years and years and years ago, 10 years ago, said that, well, you get your education for free, so we're not going to give you your first choice. You can travel wherever you want in this country, this province, to do your practicum. So we're going to give essentially people who are paying for their education priority to teach or do their practicum, their internship here in the city, but we're going to send you over to, the West Coast. Well, what if that person had children who are living here with shared custody agreements? There's so that in and of itself, it can be problematic. The misconception that if you're Indigenous, this is free and you have less say in your educational autonomy, I guess. And I guess things I would like instructors to do differently is to avoid putting undue pressure on Indigenous students, intentional or not. So kind of tying back into what I mentioned about no singular Indigenous experience. I know oftentimes I felt incredibly tokenized in the classroom. And like I'm one person. I can speak for myself, man, but I can't speak for all Indigenous peoples. I can't speak for all Inuit. I can't speak for all people in my home. So I think recognizing that just because there's an Indigenous student or a neurodivergent student or whatever have you in your class, do not tokenize them and don't put them on this pedestal as, well, we're looking for Indigenous perspectives, so we're going to ask you, and that's going to be the blanket now that I walk away from, or the classroom or whoever, that, okay, well, I asked this one Indigenous person and they're not offended, or they are, therefore that's the blanket statement. Another thing I would really love to see in the institution as well as individual classrooms is the recognition that elders or traditional knowledge keepers are just as valuable academic sources as traditional academic sources. My grandfather never learned how to read or write. He attended residential schools for a very long time, and he was one of the most brilliant people I've ever met in my whole life, God rest his soul. He had a PhD of the land. He had a PhD of the water. He had a PhD of life experience, right? And so that is valuable education. That is valuable knowledge. And I think stepping back from educational imperialism is something that all instructors should hopefully do, and not just in respect to Indigenous peoples. That ties into neurodivergent folks, international students who may be coming from a different culture, different country, even different language. And so another thing I would like to see instructors do is integrating Indigenous content or knowledges and teaching methods or assessments into the classroom. So typically, many Indigenous communities within the Canadian context were largely oral cultures. I know at Inuit, we didn't have a written language system until colonization. And so, that's not to say that, I lost my train of thought, sorry. So integrating Indigenous knowledge and content into the curriculum so that there are, if folks learn in different ways, and historically speaking, if, I know for myself, I'm a very audio visual learner. And so, you know, recognizing that folks learn in different ways, you know, due to or in spite of culture and experience. So yeah, I think I'm going to stop rambling and leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tama, and thank you to all of you. I think this has been an incredibly rich experience for the participants, and we've got them down to 6 minutes to ask questions. So if anyone has questions, you can put them into the chat. We did have a couple already. The first question was for Jannatul from someone who would like to know more about the code and if you had a link so that they could explore more information.
Thank you. So I exactly don't remember the like course codes that I bought. It's usually what happens is that when we refer to buy a code for a specific course, we refer to buy it from our bookstore or the publisher's website, whichever we are convenient with, and use that code to open the course. I mean, the course is accessible to D12, but if you want to submit your assignments and also to a lot of extent exam as well, depending on how the instructor assigns the course, you are required to activate the course code. But I do know that what are some of the name of the publishers, and for the courses that so far I have used the course code. For example, last semester I used course code for managerial accounting, and it was from Willy Plus. And I also used the course code for principles of accounting, the first accounting course. It was from Willy Plus as well. And TopPad, I used it for an economics course, microeconomics. And yeah, that's what I can recall.
Thanks so much, Jannatul.
Problem.
All right, our chat is open. Let me see if there have been more questions added here. Someone asked what we'll be doing with all the wonderful feedback we've received from panelists today. I'm going to collate all of that wonderful feedback. I'm actually currently preparing a session on equity, diversity, and accessibility for our CITL instructional series. So that's the first place that I would like to include that, but I welcome everyone who is here. I hope you took notes, but the recording will also be available if you want to review and hear some of the fantastic suggestions that we've had again. Someone commented that course codes sound very unfair if there's a cost to students. Someone else said this has been a fantastic session with such rich suggestions and perspectives, and said thank you to all of you. Oh, and Garrett Richards would like to ask a question. Do you want to ask that in the chat or turn on your mic?
No, I'll just turn on my mic. Thanks, Julie. So my question is for Logan. So as an instructor, what can or should we do to help other students in the class to respect pronouns of students that have sort of I can't find the right word, but put an atypical pronoun that some other students might not used to be that might not be used to respecting. So in general, should I correct other students when they use a pronoun that is not the person's identified pronoun, or should I ask the student who has that pronoun ahead of time what they would like, or is that is one of those more othering than the other?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, I think that's why doing, when you go to do your intro, say on the first day, that people can say what their pronoun is at that time. And it may be, we would hope that everyone who's coming in at a university level can, respect basic name and pronouns, on a fundamental level, maybe in terms of mistakes, forgetting, stuff like that, it happens. But in terms on a basic, just respect professionalism level, I think having that conversation, also if you have someone who's approached you that has what we would say a neo pronoun, something like they or z, or not they, but z, or here, and things like that aren't very common, and for some people are may not necessarily have a problem with it, but are just I've never heard that before, this is literally just a new word to me, can someone explain that? And I think that chances are, you can have, one thing that you could do, if this is something you're already kind of experiencing, is to, if you don't want to, if a student hasn't approached you and you don't want to put them on the spot, do your own homework to say like, I'm going to have this conversation, just in a very general terms of like, we're all going to talk about pronouns. This is why it's important. This is kind of like, what's going to happen. Like, we're all here, I know that anytime I've done any sort of intro things with professors, like, this is a place for education, and but there's going to be no discrimination. We won't tolerate disrespect, and especially if you have someone who's coming out to say like, this is my pronoun. There are lots of people who are uncomfortable correcting people about their own pronouns, but would like someone else to do it, right? So for you to be able to be like, you meant she, you meant they, or you meant Z, putting that effort in, and particularly, especially if the student isn't around to be able to defend themselves, it can become a little bit trickier if that student isn't out, with the pronouns. But of course, in that case, they're probably not asking you to use them. But if they're asking you, and it can be, I think the best thing to do, if a student hasn't approached you directly to say like, this is what I would like to be done, or hasn't said like, this is my pronouns, and open that conversation for you, if you don't have that personal connection to kind of ask them what their comfort level is, have the conversation in a very general sense, just in terms of like, this is basic human respect, and you can include it with other conversations around race, ability, indigeneity, all these things as well, to include all of these types of things in a very broad sense of respecting humans in the classroom.
And respecting humans is probably a perfect way for us to end it,
Yeah.
because I think that's exactly what we're all talking about today. And unfortunately, we are at 11 o'clock, and we were told very strictly that we have to end at 11, which I'm sorry to do, because it's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much to all of you for being here, all the participants, and also to the fantastic panelists for sharing your personal experiences as well as your experiences supporting other students. It's been really eye-opening and really rich conversation.
Thanks, Julie. And I'll just wrap up the session here by extending an additional warm, sincere thanks to all the panelists. I think every attendee probably has a stack of notes that they're taking away from this session and will be thinking about incorporating them in their own courses and so on. As a reminder, this session has been recorded. It will be available on the YouTube site, and you'll get more details from CITL around how to access that. So enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks very much for attending, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.